You know that feeling when you get to the end of the day and you can't even explain where your energy went, like you were doing things all day, but none of it felt like you were actually driving. It's just messages, random pressure, little cravings, a bit of stress, a bit of overthinking, and suddenly it's night again. And I think that's where a lot of men quietly lose themselves. Not in some dramatic moment, just in small, daily drifting. Because if you don't choose a direction, life doesn't stay neutral. It gives you one. Usually the easiest one. Usually the one that keeps you comfortable, entertained, distracted, and kind of numb. And the scary part is, it doesn't look like failure from the outside. It just looks like busy. But inside, you can feel it. You're moving, but you're not building. That's what this episode is about. Not superior, like you're better than anyone. More like, you finally become better than your own excuses. You stop letting your mood be the boss. You stop letting other people's reactions steer your identity. You stop living like your attention is public property. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. A lot of what we call confidence is just a good day, a good mood, good sleep, people being nice, things going your way. And when that disappears, when you're tired, when someone disrespects you, when you feel lonely, when nothing is working, you find out what you actually have. What I'm interested in is that deeper kind of strength. The kind that still shows up when you don't feel like it. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that makes you trust yourself again. So as you listen, just pick one area where you've been feeling a little off lately. Purpose, discipline, relationships, confidence. Just one. Keep it in the back of your mind. Not to judge yourself, just to see yourself clearly. Because once you can see where you're leaking, you can finally stop the leak. And that's the whole point. A life with a spine. Quiet, calm, directed. One, choose a mission bigger than your mood. If you and I were sitting together and you told me you've been stuck, I wouldn't start by telling you to work harder. That's the advice everyone gives when they don't understand what's really happening. I'd start with something simpler. You're probably not failing because you're lazy. You're failing because you don't have a clear direction that makes the hard days worth it. Because here's what nobody teaches you. When your life has no mission, your mood becomes your leader. And moods are terrible leaders. They're unpredictable. They change with sleep, with food, with one comment, with one awkward moment, with one dopamine hit. One day you're locked in. The next day you're empty, and if you're waiting to feel like it, you're basically gambling with your future. That's why the first move isn't motivation, it's aim. Epictetus opens one of the most important Stoic ideas with a clean split. Some things are up to us, and some things aren't. What's up to you is your choices, your actions, the way you use your mind. What's not up to you is people's opinions, outcomes, timing, luck. When you build your life around what you can't control, you will always feel unstable. But when you build it around what you can control, you start to feel something most people never feel for long. Steadiness. So mission, in the simplest sense, is the thing you decide to build, using what's actually yours to control. And I know what you might say right here. I don't know my purpose. Good. That's normal. Most people don't know it, but purpose isn't always something you discover like a hidden treasure. Sometimes you choose a direction and it becomes meaningful because you live it long enough for it to grow roots. So don't make this mystical, make it practical. Pick a mission for the next 30 days, not forever. 30 days, one sentence. I rebuild my body. I build one skill that changes my life. I fix my sleep and my focus. I become the kind of man who keeps promises to himself. And the sentence matters because if you can't say it clearly, you can't live it clearly. Clarity is power. Vague goals are just daydreams with better branding. Now, let me give you a historical example that makes this feel real instead of motivational. In 1645, Miyamoto Musashi was near the end of his life. He wrote the Dokudo, 21 short rules meant to guide a life with discipline and calm. One of the ideas often translated from it is basically this: don't depend on a partial feeling. Don't let a temporary emotion run your decisions. That's not poetry. That's a survival skill, because most people don't ruin their lives with one huge mistake. They ruin it through small choices made while they're tired, insecure, angry, lonely, bored, and then they call those choices who I am. Musashi wasn't saying never feel. He was saying feel it, but don't obey it. And that's exactly what a mission does for you. It gives you something to obey that isn't your mood. Because the real question isn't, do I feel motivated today? You already know the answer is going to be inconsistent. The real question is, what do you do when you don't? This is where I want to make it extremely practical. A mission isn't something you write in your notes and forget. It's something you use like a compass multiple times a day. Before you say yes to something, you quietly ask, does this move me toward my mission or away from it? When you feel the pull to scroll, to delay, to escape, you ask, is this rest or is this avoidance? When you feel yourself bargaining, I'll start tomorrow, you ask, if tomorrow never comes, what happens to my life? And look, I'm not pretending this makes life easy. It doesn't, but it makes life honest. And honesty is the beginning of self-respect. There's a Chinese story that's been passed down for centuries, the old man who decides to remove 2 mountains that block his path. People laugh at him because it's impossible, but he keeps moving stones anyway, because his logic is simple. Even if I don't finish, my children will continue, and eventually the mountain will move. That story isn't about mountains. It's about patience. It's about refusing to be intimidated by scale. It's about choosing direction over drama. That's what your mission is. It's the first stone. So here's the simplest rule I want you to take from this part. If you catch yourself drifting today, scrolling, procrastinating, overthinking, delaying, don't try to fix your whole life in that moment. Just do one small action that proves your mission is real. 2 minutes counts, 1 page counts, 1 rep counts, 1 focused sprint counts. The size doesn't matter yet. What matters is this: you're rebuilding trust with yourself. And that trust is everything. Because once you trust yourself, discipline stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like identity. So let me ask you something and answer it honestly in your own head. What's the one sentence you want your life to obey for the next 30 days? Because the day you choose that sentence and actually live it is the day your life stops being a reaction and starts becoming a decision. 2. Stop negotiating with your standards. I've noticed something about the moments where men lose momentum, and it's almost never the big disasters. It's smaller, it's quieter, it's the little internal meeting you hold with yourself when you're tired, when you're bored, when nobody's watching, and the meeting always has the same agenda. Can we make an exception? Just this once, just today, just until I feel better, just because it's been a hard week. And the problem isn't that you take a break. Breaks are human. The problem is that you start breaking your own word so often that your mind stops believing you. That's when discipline turns into a drama. That's when you need motivation, then inspiration, then a new plan, because your inner trust is gone. Marcus Aurelius had a way of cutting through all the noise. One of his simplest lines is basically, stop debating what a good man is supposed to be and just be one. And there's another standard he repeats in different ways. If something isn't right, don't do it. If it isn't true, don't say it. That isn't philosophy for the internet. That's a spine. It's what a man uses when his emotions start trying to negotiate with his principles. Because here's the truth. The moment you start negotiating with yourself, You're not making life easier. You're training yourself to be unreliable. And unreliability has a cost. You feel it as anxiety. You feel it as self-doubt. You feel it as that quiet heaviness where you don't even trust your own plans anymore. People think confidence comes from loud energy. Most of the time, it comes from quiet consistency, from knowing deep down, when I say I'm going to do something, I actually do it. So let's make this real. Think about the last time you promised yourself something simple. I'll wake up early. I'll work out. I'll stop scrolling at night. I'll focus for 1 hour. What usually breaks it isn't a monster. It's a feeling, a passing feeling. And if you treat every feeling like it deserves a vote, your life becomes a constant election, and your future loses every time. Buddhist wisdom says it in a way that's almost scary because it's so true. Your mind goes first. Your actions follow. Your life takes shape behind them. That doesn't mean you can think your way into a new life. It means if your mind is untrained, your life will look untrained. If your mind is trained, your life starts to line up. And I want to give you a historical image that brings this down to earth. There was a U.S. Navy pilot named James Stockdale who was shot down and captured during the Vietnam War. In the seconds after he ejected from his aircraft, while he was literally falling through the air into the unknown, he told himself something like, "I'm entering the world of Epictetus." Just imagine the kind of inner structure that takes. He wasn't reaching for motivation. He was reaching for a standard, for a philosophy that teaches you to separate what's yours, to control from what isn't. And he later described that moment as the moment he became a man with a mission. That's what standards are. They're decisions you make before the moment gets emotional. So if you want to build that kind of inner authority in normal life, work, relationships, gym, business, whatever, you need a few non-negotiables. Not 10, not 20, 2 or 3, simple, clear, enforceable. And the secret is, they should be so small that your excuse sounds ridiculous, not, "I will become a new person overnight." More like, "I don't miss 2 days in a row." More like, "I start my day with one hard thing." More like, "I tell the truth, even when it's awkward." That's where self-respect starts. Not in intensity, in standards you can actually keep. Here's the pattern I want you to catch in yourself, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you're about to break your standard, your brain will try to make it sound intelligent. It'll call it balance. It'll call it being realistic. It'll call it self-care. And sometimes it is. But a lot of the time, it's just fear dressed up as maturity. So when you hear yourself talking like that, don't panic. Just get honest. Ask yourself one clean question. Am I choosing rest, or am I choosing relief? Rest supports your mission. Relief usually sabotages it. And this is where you take back control with one practical move. If you feel yourself slipping into negotiation, shrink the task until it becomes undeniable. If you are going to train and you don't feel like it, don't debate for an hour. Put on your shoes and walk for 5 minutes. If you are going to work and you're drifting, open the document and write one ugly paragraph. If you are going to fix your sleep, put the phone away for 10 minutes and sit in the quiet like a grown man. Not because those actions are impressive, because they restore the most important thing, trust. And trust is what makes you powerful in the calm way. Not loud, not aggressive, just solid. People can feel it. More importantly, you can feel it. So I'll leave you with this to sit with. The life you want is on the other side of a few standards you stop negotiating with. Not someday, today. The moment you keep one small promise, you start building that spine again. 3. Stop living for approval, because it makes you easy to control. Let's be honest for a second. A lot of the pain men carry isn't from failure, it's from performance. The constant exhausting effort to be seen a certain way, strong, smart, unbothered, desired. respected. And the craziest part is you can win that performance. People can like you, praise you, even want you, and you still feel empty because you're not living from your center. You're living from their reaction. Approval is a drug that doesn't feel like a drug because it's social. It feels normal. It even feels good. But it has a cost. The more you need it, the more you start editing yourself. You start smoothing your edges. You start over-explaining. You start saying yes when your body is screaming no. You start tolerating disrespect because you don't want conflict. You start shaping your whole life around avoiding discomfort. And then one day, you realize you're not free, you're just well-behaved. Epictetus had this line that I come back to when I catch myself slipping into people-pleasing. It's not things that upset us, it's our opinions about things. In plain language, it means your nervous system isn't being destroyed by what someone said. It's being destroyed by what you decided it meant about you. You decided it meant you're not enough. You decided it meant you're losing status. You decided it meant you're about to be rejected. And then, your whole body goes into fix-it mode. That fix-it mode is where a lot of men lose their dignity. They chase, they beg, they explain, they argue, they try to control the other person's mind. They try to win the courtroom in someone else's head. And it never works. Here's the deeper problem. Needing approval makes you reactive. And reactivity is the opposite of presence. A man who's present can hear criticism and stay steady. A man who needs approval hears criticism and panics. He starts bargaining. He starts proving. He starts defending. And the moment you start defending your worth, you've already told the world your worth is negotiable. Now, I'm not saying don't care what anyone thinks. That's not human. We're social creatures. Even Marcus Aurelius cared what people thought sometimes. You can feel it in how he talks to himself. But he kept trying to return to one thing. Act with integrity and let the rest fall where it falls. That's the only kind of confidence that lasts. Buddhist teaching says this in a different way. Suffering comes from attachment. Not just attachment to people, but attachment to outcomes. To being admired, to being understood, to being treated a certain way. If you're attached to being liked, you'll become a servant to everybody's mood. You'll wake up and ask the world, who do I need to be today so I don't get rejected? And that's a painful way to live. So what does the superior man do here? Not superior like arrogance, superior like he stops selling himself. He becomes clear. And clarity is attractive in every area of life, work, friendships, relationships, because clarity feels like safety. It feels like structure. It feels like a man who knows where he stands. This is where relationship dynamics get real. When a man is approval hungry, he enters a relationship like a student trying to pass a test. He's constantly checking the score. Am I doing enough? Is she upset? Did I say the wrong thing? Do I need to fix this right now? And that anxiety doesn't create love. It creates pressure. It creates instability. It creates a weird emotional job for the other person. They're not just living, they're managing you. But when you're centered, something changes. You can listen without collapsing. You can care without chasing. You can be warm without being soft. You can hold boundaries without becoming cruel. And here's the subtle part. This doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. It applies to your boss, your family, your friends, even strangers online. Anytime you feel yourself reaching for approval, you're at risk of losing your spine. Let me give you a historical image that makes this feel concrete. Think about Socrates in Athens, more than 2,000 years ago, standing trial. He could have begged, he could have flattered, he could have performed humility to escape punishment. Instead, he chose something rare. He refused to betray his principles just to be seen as acceptable. Whether you agree with everything about him or not, the core lesson is undeniable. He valued integrity more than public approval. That's not confidence, that's identity. That's a man who decided his self-respect isn't up for debate. Most of us won't face anything dramatic like a trial, but we face smaller versions of it all the time. The group chat where you want to be liked, the relationship moment where you want to be chosen, the workplace moment where you want to be approved, the family moment where you want to be understood. And every time, the same question appears quietly. Will you abandon yourself to keep the peace? Because that's what approval addiction really is, self-abandonment with good manners. So let's make this practical in a way you can actually use today. First, notice your approval tells. The body gives you away. You feel a tension in the chest. You start typing too much. You rehearse messages. You rewrite. You soften. You add extra emojis. You over-explain. You offer long justifications. You give people more access than they earned, just so they won't leave. When you catch that, don't shame yourself. Just pause and do a small reset. Slow your breathing and shorten your words. Not because short words are alpha, because short words are honest, because your value doesn't need a paragraph. Then apply one clean principle. You can be respectful without being needy. Here's an if-then that will change your life if you actually use it. If you feel the urge to prove yourself, especially in a relationship, then don't add more words. Add more calm. Wait 5 seconds. Let your nervous system settle. Then speak from clarity. One sentence, not a speech. And you'll notice something uncomfortable at first. Some people will like you less when you stop performing. That's not a tragedy. That's a filter. Because a lot of people weren't connected to the real you anyway. They were connected to the version of you that was easy to control. Let me ask you something personal, and I want you to answer it honestly in your head. Where do you over-explain the most? With who? Because that's usually the place where your self-respect has been trying to get your attention for a long time. Now imagine what it would feel like to be so grounded that you could say calmly, "I hear you," without rushing to fix yourself. Or, "That doesn't work for me," without guilt. Or, "I'll think about it," without being pulled into panic. That's the kind of man people trust. Not because he's loud, because he's stable, and stability is rare. So the point isn't to become cold. The point is to become solid, to care deeply without handing your steering wheel to someone else's opinion, to love without begging, to lead your life without auditioning for it. Because when you stop living for approval, you don't become less kind, you become more honest. And honesty, when it's calm, is one of the strongest forms of love. 4. Stay calm under pressure, because that's where your real power lives. Let's talk about the moment that ruins most men. It's not the big life decisions. It's the small pressure moments. Somebody disrespects you. Something doesn't go your way. You get a stressful email. A relationship conversation gets tense. You feel misunderstood. And suddenly, you're not choosing your life anymore. You're reacting to it. You say something you can't take back. You make a decision from anger. You chase reassurance. You spiral. And later, when it's quiet again, you sit there thinking, "Why did I do that?" That's not because you're a bad person. It's because pressure reveals what you've trained. Seneca had a brutal way of describing anger. He basically says it's a form of temporary madness, and that's exactly how it feels when you're inside it. You feel right. You feel justified. You feel like you're protecting yourself, but you're not protecting yourself. You're losing yourself. The part of you that can think clearly goes offline for a moment, and your nervous system takes the wheel, so the goal isn't to become emotionless. That's not human. The goal is to become the kind of man who can feel a strong emotion and still keep his dignity. Epictetus would tell you something simple. The world doesn't control you. Your judgments about the world do. That sounds philosophical until you realize it's painfully practical. Because the moment you feel pressure, your mind tells a story. They're disrespecting me. I'm losing. I'm not enough. This can't happen. And the story is what lights the fire. The event is just the spark. So the work is learning how to catch the story early, before it turns into behavior. Let me give you an image of this that's real and human. Picture the Antarctic winter in the early 20th century. Ernest Shackleton and his crew are trapped when their ship, Endurance, gets caught and crushed by ice. Imagine what that does to the mind. You're in a place that doesn't care about your plans. You're losing the thing you depended on. You're surrounded by cold that feels infinite. People are scared, hungry, tense, and the leader has to make decisions while everyone is watching him, measuring his calm, borrowing his nervous system. Shackleton didn't survive that because he was always confident. He survived because he managed emotion like a professional. He didn't let panic become contagious. He understood something most people don't understand. Under pressure, your emotions are not private. They become leadership. They become atmosphere. They become the temperature of the whole room. That's what calm is. Calm is not relaxed. Calm is control of the emotional climate. And you don't get it by wishing. You get it by practicing one small thing: separation. The Stoics were masters of this. They separate what happens from what it means. They separate feeling from action. They separate impulse from decision. Marcus Aurelius keeps reminding himself in different ways that events are external, but his response is his. That's the spine. Not pretending nothing hurts, but refusing to let pain turn into chaos. Japanese discipline says a similar thing in a different language. Musashi, the swordsman, didn't win duels because he was the strongest man in the room. He won because he could keep clarity when the room shook. He trained himself to stay centered when fear showed up, when uncertainty showed up, when adrenaline showed up. That's a skill, not a personality trait. And Chinese strategy has its own way of pointing at the same truth. If you can't control yourself, you'll be controlled by the situation. You'll be pulled by the opponent, pulled by the crowd, pulled by your own inner noise. The person who stays calm doesn't just feel better. They see better. They choose better. Now here's the part that matters for you today, not in Antarctica, not in a duel, not on some battlefield. In your daily life, pressure usually looks like a conversation you don't want to have, a deadline you're scared of, a craving you're trying to resist, a moment of disrespect, or that tight feeling in your chest when you think you're falling behind. So what do you do in that moment? You do the smallest thing that creates space. Because space is where freedom lives. Here's a practice that sounds too simple until you realize it's the difference between dignity and regret. When you feel pressure rising, slow down your body before you try to fix the situation. Drop your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. Breathe lower, slower. Not as some wellness thing, as a tactical move. Because your body is the first place the storm shows up, and if you calm the body, you regain access to your mind. Then you name what's happening in plain language, not poetic language, plain language. I'm feeling disrespected. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling rushed. I'm feeling the urge to lash out. That naming does something powerful. It turns emotion into information. It stops it from being a dictator. And right there, in that tiny pause, you make a decision about what kind of man you want to be in the next 10 seconds. Not the next year, the next 10 seconds. Because pressure makes people think in extremes. I need to fix everything. I need to win. I need to prove myself. No, you need to hold your standard for 10 seconds. That's it. Let me ask you something quietly, because this is where the truth lives. When you get angry or anxious, what are you really trying to protect? Your values or your ego? That question hurts a little, but it's freeing. Because once you see that half your reactions are just ego trying to avoid discomfort, you stop trusting the reaction. You stop obeying it automatically. And there's a Buddhist idea that fits perfectly here. You can't always control what arises in the mind, but you can choose whether to feed it. A thought is like a spark. If you throw dry wood on it, stories, revenge fantasies, rumination, it becomes a fire. If you don't feed it, it passes. So here's your clean. If then for this point, and I want you to actually use it. If you feel pressure rising and you're about to react, then you wait long enough to take one slow breath, and you choose the smallest calm action instead of the loud emotional one. One breath, one pause, one decision. Sometimes that calm action is staying quiet for a few seconds. Sometimes it's saying, "Give me a moment," instead of snapping. Sometimes it's walking away and returning later. Sometimes it's answering with fewer words. Sometimes it's choosing a question instead of a statement. That last one is powerful. Under pressure, questions create clarity, statements create war. And this is the payoff that people don't talk about enough. When you train calm, you become harder to manipulate, because manipulation usually works by hijacking your emotions. Someone pushes your buttons, you explode, and now you're the one who looks unstable. Someone ignores you, you chase, and now they control your behavior. Someone disrespects you, you start proving yourself, and now your worth is in their hands. A calm man doesn't give people that leverage, not because he's cold, because he's centered, and the more you practice this, the more you start feeling a quiet kind of confidence. Not the confidence of being admired, the confidence of knowing you can handle yourself. That's real, that's rare. That's what makes everything else in your life cleaner. Your work, your relationships, your discipline, your future. Because when you can stay calm under pressure, you stop living like a hostage to your own nervous system. You start living like a man with a spine. 5. Hold your boundaries without becoming cold. This one is sensitive because a lot of men hear boundaries and they immediately picture one of two extremes. Either the guy who says yes to everything and quietly hates himself, or the guy who's harsh, rigid, emotionally unavailable, and calls it strength. Neither one is what we're after. Real boundaries are simpler than that. A boundary is just the line where your self-respect lives. It's the place where you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And I'll be honest, most boundary problems don't start with other people. They start with you hesitating. You feel something is wrong. You feel something doesn't work for you. You feel something is disrespectful or draining. And you still smile. You still play nice. You still explain yourself in circles because you're trying to avoid tension. But avoiding tension is exactly how you invite more disrespect. The Stoics had a calm way of seeing this. They didn't teach you to be rude. They taught you to be clear. Marcus Aurelius keeps returning to this idea. Your job is to do what's right with a steady mind, without needing applause. That means you can hold a boundary without anger. You can say no without a speech. You can walk away without needing to win. And that's the first shift that makes boundaries feel human instead of robotic. You stop treating boundaries like a fight. You treat them like a fact. Because most people don't cross your boundaries once and then stop because you gave a great explanation. They stop because they meet consistency. They meet action. They meet the quiet energy of, "This is where I stand." Let me give you a real image that helps. There's a story from ancient Rome about Cato the Younger, known for being almost painfully principled. Whether you love him or you think he was too rigid, one thing is hard to deny: he was difficult to corrupt. Powerful people couldn't easily buy him, flatter him, or pressure him into betraying his values. And that kind of inner firmness doesn't come from having the perfect words. It comes from deciding who you are before the moment arrives. That's boundaries. Deciding who you are before the pressure arrives. Now, here's where it gets practical and personal. Most men think boundaries are something you use against other people. But boundaries are mostly something you use with yourself. You set a standard, and then you keep it. You don't keep it perfectly, but you keep it consistently. Because once you start breaking your own boundaries, answering when you don't want to, staying when you should leave, tolerating what you know is wrong, your nervous system learns a brutal lesson. My comfort matters more than my dignity. And that's a hard pattern to undo. So let's make it simple. Boundaries usually show up in 3 places: your time, your attention, your emotional access. Time is obvious. If you don't protect it, other people will spend it for you. Attention is quieter. If you don't guard it, it gets stolen by drama, phones, and other people's chaos. Emotional access is the deepest one. Not everyone deserves full access to your mind, your plans, your softness, your fears. Some people will use that access to pull you off center. And I know that might sound intense, but you already know it's true. You've felt it. You've told someone too much and then regretted it. You've tried to be nice and ended up being used. You've overgiven and then felt resentful. Not because you're a bad person, but because your boundaries were missing. Here's the part most men struggle with. The first time you set a boundary, you feel guilty. That guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're breaking an old habit, the habit of earning love through self-abandonment. Buddhist teaching talks about attachment as a source of suffering, and one attachment that hurts a lot of men is the attachment to being seen as good son, good friend, good partner, good employee. And if your identity depends on being good, you'll tolerate things you shouldn't tolerate, because saying no feels like becoming a villain. But saying no is not cruelty. Saying no is clarity. And clarity is what protects love, because resentment kills love faster than honesty ever will. So how do you set boundaries without becoming cold? You stop adding emotional heat to the boundary. You don't punish. You don't insult. You don't lecture. You don't do the long courtroom speech explaining why you're right. You just state it clean and you back it with action. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I'm not available for this. I'm going to leave now. We can talk when it's calmer. Short, calm, final, and then, and this is the part that makes it real, you don't get pulled into negotiation. You don't get baited into defending your boundary like you're asking permission. A boundary you have to beg for isn't a boundary. It's a request. Now, here's your if-then for this point. If you feel yourself over-explaining, then pause and cut your sentence in half. Say less. Hold the line. Let your calm be the message. And I want to give you one more practical tool, because this helps a lot. When you set a boundary, you don't need to argue about their character. You don't need to call them toxic. You don't need to diagnose them. You can just describe the behavior and the consequence. When you speak to me like that, I end the conversation. When plans change last minute repeatedly, I stop committing. When you disrespect my time, I stop offering it. That style keeps you clean. It keeps you out of drama. It keeps you in control of your life. And here's the deeper payoff. Boundaries don't just protect you from other people. They protect your mission. They protect the man you're trying to become. Because the truth is, if you don't have boundaries, you'll never have consistent progress. Your energy will constantly be drained by things you didn't choose, by emotional messes you didn't create, by obligations that don't align with your life. A man with boundaries isn't harsh. He's directed. He's not trying to be liked by everyone. He's trying to be loyal to what matters. So I'll ask you something simple to sit with. Where in your life are you being nice in a way that's actually self-betrayal? Because the moment you answer that honestly, you'll know exactly where to set the next boundary. 6. Master desire, or it will quietly own you. This is one of those topics people either avoid completely, or they talk about it in a way that feels fake. I want to keep it real and simple. Desire isn't the enemy. Desire is fuel. It's life force. It's what makes you hungry to build, hungry to create, hungry to connect. The problem is when desire becomes your steering wheel, when it starts deciding your schedule, your standards, your attention, your self-respect. That's when it stops being fuel and starts being a leash. And you can tell when it's a leash because it makes you do things you don't respect. It makes you chase people who don't value you. It makes you stay up late when you promised yourself you'd sleep. It makes you waste hours on fantasies instead of building the real thing. It makes you trade peace for pleasure over and over until you don't even feel pleasure anymore, just relief. The Stoics were calm about this. They didn't pretend desire disappears. They just refused to worship it. Epictetus has this way of reminding you, you're not your impulses. You're the one who gets to choose what you do with them. And Marcus keeps pulling himself back to the same idea. If you want to be free, you can't be ruled by every craving that walks through your mind. And I want to say something blunt but friendly. If you can't say no to your own cravings, you will struggle to say no to anyone else. Your boundaries will be weak, your discipline will be weak, your confidence will be fragile, because your nervous system will always be waiting for the next hit. Now, Buddhism goes even deeper here, and it's worth stealing one simple idea. Craving doesn't just want the thing. Craving wants relief from the discomfort of not having the thing. That's why it feels urgent. That's why it feels like you need it. But if you watch closely, most cravings are just waves. They rise, they peak, they fall. The problem is most people never stay present long enough to see the wave fall. They obey it at the peak and call that who I am. So what does a centered man do? He learns to ride the wave without acting. And yes, that's a skill. You can train it. There's a Japanese story that fits this perfectly. It's about Miyamoto Musashi again, but not the dramatic duel version, more the discipline version. The same man who could step into a duel also chose long stretches of harsh training, isolation, and simplicity. He understood something that modern men forget. If you keep feeding every desire, you become soft. Not physically, spiritually. You start needing comfort the way an addict needs a fix. And once you need it, you can be controlled by it. Musashi wrote rules for himself that were basically anti-craving. Don't chase pleasure. Don't depend on feeling good. Accept things as they are. Live clean. Again, not because life should be dry, but because freedom is worth more than constant stimulation. Now, let's bring this down from philosophy to your real life. Desire usually shows up in three ways: sexual desire, food and comfort desire, attention desire, scrolling, entertainment, dopamine, and the pattern is the same across all three. You feel tension, you seek relief, you obey, you feel a short hit, then you feel slightly weaker. So the goal isn't to kill desire. The goal is to stop using desire as emotional medicine. Because when you use pleasure to fix pain, you train yourself to avoid pain. And pain is where growth lives. Here's the practical move that changes everything. Delay. Not forever. Just delay. When you feel a craving, don't fight it. Don't shame it. Just delay the action by a small amount of time and stay present inside your body. 10 breaths, 2 minutes, a short walk, a glass of water, anything that creates space between impulse and behavior. Because that space is freedom. And here's what you'll notice if you actually do it. The craving starts talking. It starts bargaining. It starts trying to sound intelligent. It'll say, this is who you are. It'll say, you deserve it. It'll say, you'll start tomorrow. That voice is not you. That's the craving trying to survive. The Buddha's language around this is simple. You don't have to identify with what arises. You can observe it. And when you observe it, it loses some of its power. It turns from a command into a sensation. So here's your if-then for this point. If you feel a craving that would sabotage your standards, then delay it by 10 minutes and do one action that aligns with your mission instead. One push-up set, one paragraph, one shower, one walk, one clean task. 10 minutes. That's it. And I want to add a quiet truth. The man who learns to delay desire becomes dangerous in a calm way. Because he's no longer easy to hook. He's no longer easy to manipulate. He doesn't jump when the world snaps its fingers. He chooses. That's what self-mastery is. Not perfection. Choice. Now let me ask you a real question to sit with. What craving has been stealing the most from your life lately? Sexual distraction, comfort and food, or endless scrolling? Because whatever your answer is, That's your training ground. 7. Lead in relationships with presence, not performance. Let me say this in a way that's simple and real. A lot of relationship pain isn't because people don't love each other. It's because they don't feel safe with each other. And safe here doesn't mean boring. It means emotionally stable. It means the relationship isn't constantly living on the edge of someone's moods, someone's insecurity, someone's need for reassurance. And this is where a lot of men get confused. They think leadership in a relationship means control, or it means always having the right answer, or it means being the strong one who never feels anything. None of that is true. That's performance. Real leadership is presence. It's the ability to stay centered when emotion rises, to listen without collapsing, to care without chasing, and to be clear without being cruel. Because here's what performance looks like. You're trying to say the perfect thing. You're trying to avoid making her upset. You're trying to keep the vibe stable at all costs, and it turns you into a nervous employee in your own relationship. You're constantly checking the temperature, constantly adjusting yourself, constantly afraid that one wrong move will cost you love. That energy doesn't create attraction, it creates pressure. Presence is different. Presence is when you can sit in tension without panicking. You can hear a complaint without taking it as a verdict on your worth. You can hear emotion without needing to fix it immediately. You can let someone feel what they feel without letting that feeling take your spine away. And this is where Stoicism is incredibly useful, not because it makes you cold, but because it trains you to separate what's happening from what it means. When someone you love is upset, your mind will usually try to make it about you. I'm failing. I'm not enough. I'm about to lose them. That story is what turns you reactive. But if you can pause and stay with reality, this is an emotional moment and I can stay calm inside it, you instantly become more trustworthy. Let me give you a clean image from history that's not romantic, but it's powerful. Admiral James Stockdale, same man we talked about earlier, survived years of captivity, partly because he learned how not to let fear run his decisions. Now, relationships aren't prison camps, obviously, but the mechanism is similar. Pressure tries to hijack you. Fear tries to pull you into bad choices. And if you don't have inner discipline, you get dragged. Presence is the relationship version of inner discipline. It's when you don't let emotion become chaos. So what does that look like in real life? It looks like this. You don't argue to win. You listen to understand. And you don't listen like a weak man trying to get approval. You listen like a strong man trying to get truth. It also looks like taking responsibility without self-hatred. If you messed up, you don't defend for an hour. You don't explain your way out of it. You own it clean, you fix it, and you move forward. That's leadership. Because nothing feels safer than someone who can admit fault without collapsing. And it looks like boundaries with warmth. You don't try to dominate. You don't try to teach lessons. You simply hold your standard and keep your tone calm. Now, there's a concept David Data talks about a lot in The Way of the Superior Man. Polarity, masculine and feminine energy. Some people make it weird, but we can keep it simple. Polarity is just tension between two complementary forces. Direction and flow, structure and emotion, stability and movement. And in many relationships, attraction grows when there's clarity and steadiness, when there's a sense that somebody is grounded. That doesn't mean the man has to control everything. It means he has to be responsible for his own center. Because the truth is, when you're unstable inside, you bring instability into the relationship, and then you blame the relationship for making you feel unstable. So the practice is internal. You become the calm place first. Here's one practical tool that will instantly make you more present in a relationship. Slow your response time. Most men answer too fast because they're anxious. They think speed is confidence. But speed is often panic disguised as decisiveness. When a conversation gets emotional, Slow down. Let a few seconds pass. Breathe. Then speak. That tiny delay does two things. It calms your nervous system and it signals safety. Now let's talk about a mistake that destroys presence. Explaining. Over-explaining is usually fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being rejected, fear of losing, and it almost always makes things worse because it turns the conversation into a courtroom. You're not connecting anymore, you're defending. So here's your if-then for this point. If you feel the urge to over-explain in a tense moment, then stop and say one honest sentence instead. One sentence that names your reality and your intention. I hear you. I get why you feel that way. I need a minute to think. I care about this, and I want to solve it calmly. I'm not okay with being spoken to like that, but I'm here to talk when it's respectful. That's presence. Calm, direct, real. And here's the question I want you to sit with, because it reveals everything. When conflict shows up, do you become smaller to keep peace, or do you become clearer? Because becoming smaller breeds resentment. Becoming clearer builds respect, even if it's uncomfortable at first. One more thing, and it's important. Presence isn't just how you handle conflict. It's also how you show up when things are good. If you're always on your phone, always half listening, always distracted, you're basically telling the other person, you're not worth my full attention. And that creates distance that you'll later feel and call lost attraction. So if you want your relationship to feel alive, practice attention like it's devotion, not in a needy way, in a grounded way. Put the phone away sometimes. Look at them. Listen. Be there. That's the kind of masculine presence people don't forget. And it's also the kind of presence that changes you because it trains you to be in your life instead of escaping it. So, let me ask you something simple. In your relationships, where do you perform the most? Trying to look strong, trying to look perfect, trying to avoid conflict, because that's probably where you're not being present. 8. Move in silence, because your life gets stronger when it's less exposed. You know what I've noticed? The more a man talks about what he's going to do, the less he does. Not because he's a liar, because talking can become a substitute for building. It gives you a quick feeling of progress without the uncomfortable part, actually doing the work. And I'm not saying you should be secretive like you're plotting something. I mean something calmer. Privacy. The kind that protects your focus, the kind that keeps your energy clean, the kind that stops your life from being a public performance, because exposure creates noise. When too many people know your plans, you start managing their expectations. You start explaining your choices. You start defending your direction. You start absorbing opinions you didn't ask for. And even if they mean well, it still drains you. It pulls your attention outward. And most men already live too outward. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't measure a man by what he said, only by what he practiced. Marcus Aurelius wrote most of his reflections to himself, not to impress anyone. It wasn't content, it was training. Quiet training. And that's a lesson in itself. Some of the most powerful work happens when nobody is clapping. There's also something very old in Eastern wisdom that fits perfectly here. In Taoist thought, there's this idea of not forcing, of letting actions be clean, direct, and almost invisible. The river doesn't announce where it's going. It just keeps moving. That's what silence does. It takes away the need to prove, and it leaves you with only the work. Now here's the practical reason silence matters. When you tell people your plans too early, you risk two things. 1. You start chasing approval for the plan instead of building it. 2. You invite doubt into your mind before your foundation is strong. And some people will doubt you for reasons that have nothing to do with you. They doubt because they're afraid of change. They doubt because your growth makes them feel small. They doubt because they don't want you to outgrow the version of you they were comfortable with. So, you learn something important. Not everyone deserves access. This is where the way of the superior man becomes very real. A superior man doesn't need to announce transformation. He lets the results speak, not as an ego thing, as a discipline thing. Let me give you a historical image that's clean. Think about a craftsman, someone like a swordsmith in Japan or a calligrapher in China, working for years on a skill that takes a lifetime. That kind of mastery doesn't come from talking. It comes from repetition, solitude, and patience. The work is quiet. The progress is quiet. But when it's finished, it's obvious. That's the vibe. Quiet effort. Undeniable outcome. And in modern life, silence does one more thing. It protects your nervous system. Because being constantly seen is exhausting. Always posting, always explaining, always reacting, always defending. It keeps you in a state of emotional alertness. You never fully rest. You never fully focus. You never fully build. So if you've been feeling drained, one of the simplest fixes isn't a new habit. It's removing unnecessary exposure, less talking, less posting, less explaining, less trying to be understood by everyone. Here's a simple way to practice this without becoming weird or distant. Start telling people your results, not your plans. Instead of, I'm going to start training, you just train. Instead of, I'm going to change my life this year, you change your schedule this week. Instead of, I'm building something big, you build it quietly until it can stand. And you'll notice something powerful. When you stop talking, you get your energy back. The energy that used to leak through words returns as action. Now, this doesn't mean you isolate from everyone. You still need a few trusted people, maybe one or two, who actually support your growth and don't compete with it. But the circle becomes smaller, cleaner, more intentional. Here's your if-then for this point. If you feel the urge to announce your next move, then delay the announcement and do 1 hour of real work first. 1 hour of proof. Then you'll notice you don't even crave the announcement anymore. Because the craving wasn't about connection, it was about validation. And I'll ask you something simple, because this question can change the way you move. Who in your life has earned the right to hear your plans? And who just has access because you've been oversharing? That's not a judgment, it's just clarity. A man who moves in silence isn't hiding. He's protecting what's sacred, his focus, his mission, his calm, his growth. And when you do that consistently, something beautiful happens. You stop needing attention, and you start producing results. And results have a quiet authority that words can never imitate. 9. Build deep focus, because distraction is the silent thief of your life. Let's be real. Most men don't lose their future in one dramatic mistake. They lose it in tiny fragments. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. A quick scroll. A break that turns into an hour. A video that turns into a night. And it doesn't feel dangerous while it's happening. That's what makes it so deadly. It feels like nothing, but those fragments add up to a life where you're always busy and rarely progressing. And the hardest part is this: distraction doesn't just steal time, it steals identity. Because the more scattered you are, the more you start seeing yourself as someone who can't focus, someone who can't follow through, someone who always starts and rarely finishes. And once that story settles in your mind, you start living under it. The Stoics would call that slavery. Not slavery to a person, but slavery to impulse. Marcus Aurelius has this calm obsession with not letting the outside world pull his inner world around. Not because he wanted a quiet life, because he wanted a directed one. He wanted to be able to choose his mind. And that's what focus really is, the ability to choose your mind on purpose. Now, I want to say something that might sting a little, but it's freeing once you accept it. Most distraction is not about entertainment. It's about avoidance. You're not just scrolling because you're bored. You're scrolling because there's something you don't want to feel. Pressure, uncertainty, loneliness, the fear of starting, the fear of failing, the fear of discovering you're not as ready as you hoped, so you numb out. And the phone is the most socially acceptable sedative on earth. Buddhist teaching has a simple way of describing this. The mind runs from discomfort into craving. It reaches for something pleasant to escape something unpleasant. And when that becomes your pattern, you don't just lose focus, you lose your ability to sit with yourself. And you can't build a great life if you can't sit with yourself. So how do you fix it? Not with a complicated system, not with 100 productivity hacks. You fix it by building a few sacred blocks in your day, small islands of deep work where distraction is not allowed to enter. Because focus isn't a personality trait, it's an environment you create. Let me give you an image from history that makes this feel obvious. Think about Isaac Newton during the plague years in the 1700s when Cambridge closed and he went back to Woolsthorpe. A lot of the world was paused, but he used that quiet period to think deeply, so deeply that it became one of the most productive stretches of his life. Now, I'm not saying you need a plague and a farm to focus. I'm saying this: when the noise drops, the mind can build. When the noise stays high, the mind stays shallow. So the question becomes, how do you lower the noise on purpose? Here's one move that will change everything if you actually do it. You choose one daily deep work appointment and you protect it like it's a meeting with your future self. 30 minutes is enough to start. The key is that it's non-negotiable. Same time each day if possible, same place, same ritual. And you don't begin that block by getting ready. You begin by doing the thing. Because getting ready is where a lot of men hide. They sharpen tools forever because they're afraid to cut wood. So you start ugly, you start simple, you start now. Here's what this looks like in real life. You sit down, you put your phone in another room, you open one task, and you stay with it until the discomfort fades. Because the first few minutes are always uncomfortable. Your brain will itch, it will try to escape. It will suddenly remember 100 important things. That's not a sign you're weak. That's withdrawal. You're withdrawing from stimulation. If you can stay through that first wave, something beautiful happens. The mind settles. You drop into it. You start moving like a machine. Not in a cold way, in a clean way. You become effective. And here's a Stoic flavored truth. You don't need to win the whole day. You need to win the first block. Once you win that, the day stops feeling chaotic. You stop feeling behind. You stop needing motivation because you've already created momentum. Now, let's make this extremely practical because I want you to be able to apply it today. There are two types of focus you need: removing the obvious distractions and removing the emotional distractions. Obvious distractions are the phone, the tabs, the notifications. Those are easy. You just remove access. Emotional distractions are harder. They're the inner noise. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? What if I'm wasting time? Those thoughts aren't solved by thinking more. They're solved by doing one small step anyway. So here's your if-then for this point. If you catch yourself reaching for distraction, then you pause and ask yourself, what feeling am I trying to avoid right now? Name it in one word: pressure, fear, boredom, loneliness, and then do 2 minutes of the task you're avoiding. Just 2 minutes. That's enough to break the spell. And I'll tell you something you'll notice if you practice this for even a week. The more you can stay with discomfort, the more powerful you feel. Not because life becomes easy, because you become solid. Focus is a form of self-respect. It's you telling yourself, my life is worth my full attention. So let me ask you something simple. What is the one thing in your life right now that would change everything if you gave it 30 minutes of real focus every day? Sit with that, because that answer is usually the doorway to your next level. 10. Make it a way of life, not a temporary mood. If you zoom out for a second, you'll notice something comforting. None of what we talked about is complicated. It's not secret knowledge. It's not a mystical transformation. It's a handful of choices, repeated until they become you. A mission you obey even on the days you feel off. Standards you stop negotiating with. A calm nervous system under pressure. Boundaries that protect your self-respect without turning you cold. Desire you can feel without letting it drive. Presence in relationships that comes from steadiness, not performance. Silence that protects your focus. Deep work that turns your days into real progress. That's the way. Not a speech, not a personality, a way. And here's the part that makes it emotionally real. You don't need to become someone else. You need to return to the version of you that doesn't abandon himself. The version of you that can look in the mirror and feel clean. Not perfect, clean. Because a lot of men live with this quiet conflict inside. They know what they should do, and they don't do it. They know what kind of man they respect, and they keep drifting away from him. And that gap creates a low-level suffering that never fully goes away. You can distract it for a night. You can numb it with entertainment. You can cover it with confidence. But it comes back when everything gets quiet. The good news is you can close that gap, not in one heroic moment, but in small moments of integrity. Marcus Aurelius had this habit of bringing everything back to one question. What does the situation demand of me if I want to act with virtue? Not to look good, not to win, not to be praised, just to be aligned with what's right. The Stoics weren't chasing comfort, they were chasing freedom. Freedom from being owned by impulse, freedom from being pushed around by other people, freedom from the chaos of their own reactions. And Eastern wisdom points at the same thing from another angle. You suffer when you cling to pleasure, to approval, to outcomes, to being seen a certain way. The more you loosen that grip, the more you can move through life without being dragged by it. So if there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, it's not be tougher, it's simpler. Build a spine, a quiet inner structure you can rely on when life gets loud. Because the world is not going to get calmer for you. People are not going to become more reasonable on your schedule. Temptation is not going to disappear. Pressure will always find you. So the question becomes, will you be the kind of man who collapses and reacts? Or the kind of man who pauses and chooses? And I'm not saying that like a motivational poster. I mean it as a real fork in the road you face every day in tiny ways. Every time you keep a promise, every time you don't chase approval, every time you do the hard thing first, every time you hold a boundary calmly, every time you put the phone down and go back to your mission, those are votes, and those votes build identity. So here's what I want you to do today, not tomorrow. Choose one sentence for the next 30 days, one mission sentence, then choose one non-negotiable proof you'll do daily, even if it's small. And when you feel yourself drifting, because you will, don't panic. Just return. Return to the sentence. Return to the proof. Return to the way. That's how a man becomes superior to his own excuses. Not once, repeatedly. And if this episode gave you something you felt in your chest, not just understood in your head, hold on to it. Carry it into your next decision, because the next decision is where your life is. And maybe that's the whole game. Not becoming perfect, just becoming someone you can trust, day after day, until the world starts treating you differently because you started treating yourself differently.